Welcome to Level Up Tribes. Level Up Tribes provides resources to help you attain the necessary resources to level up your mind, body, and soul and realize your full potential. It is about exploring, learning, providing you with the tools from the experts for you to create a better version of yourself. I am your host, Agnes Goodwine, and welcome, Tribes. Today I have Michael Harris. He's a dynamic business coach, lifelong entrepreneur, yoga teacher, and co-founder of Endless Stages, a company dedicated to help motivate authors, speakers, and experts get their voice, message, and story out to the world with maximal impact. He is the author of 3 #1 best-selling books. Michael struggled and healed himself from chronic health conditions and is grateful that he's been able to take his personal challenges and help others find what inspires and motivates them. Thank you again for being here. And I just want you to start from the beginning, like tell background, where you're from and that pivotal moment that kind of guided you to this path where you are now.
First of all, thank you for having me on your show. And I've listened to some of your other shows, and they're really great. And you have the guided meditation in there as well. And you have Donna's show about really a new level of healing. I love what she said about, creating a life by design. So I invite all the listeners here today to not only listen to this show, but to go back to some of the other shows. And Dave Combs, which wrote Rachel's song, he's a great guy. Instead of starting right from the beginning, I think what I want to do is, one of the goals that I had last year was to climb as many buttes as I can, one a week. And for those that don't know what a butte is, it's really just like a small mountain, a small volcano. I live in Central Oregon. There's volcanoes everywhere. And so there's more buttes than what I could count. And so I'll run out in the desert, because I live on the edge of the desert in Oregon, and go up all these buttes, up and down these buttes. And I wasn't always able to do that. That's why I'm starting there, because it's such a blessing to be able to move my body and to be alive and to be able to go to the top of the mountain, literally, but also figuratively, because it's like it's an analogy for me in many ways for my life, because I was on a cane at one time, and they were talking about amputating my legs in 1986 and 1987 from vascular disease. My right leg was 100% blocked, my left leg was 65% blocked, and I did have what's called a fempop, which is a bypass surgery, but on the legs. And several months later, they wanted to do it again because my arteries had reblocked. And I left the hospital AMA, against medical advice. And I only went back one other time, and they were blown away that I was alive and I was healthy and I was walking. Yet that wasn't the beginning. If I go back even younger, at 12 years old, I was in a water skiing accident. I was a hotshot water skier. As a kid, I was 12 years old, and I was doing a beach landing. I like to do beach landings. I try not to get wet. I don't like to fall, so I just like go right up to the beach and just kind of slow, and then, drop down in a couple of inches of water on the shore. Well, this particular day, that's not how it happened. I hit the beach pretty hard. I was coming in fast and hard and smacked the beach. And to make kind of a longer story short, I ended up not in the hospital that day, but the next day, because, I was bruised up and banged up. But went to the hospital the next day. And before I knew it, I was waking up from a coma. I was told I was in a coma for 10 days. They had taken out 60% of my liver. I had 21 blood transfusions, cracked ribs, collapsed lung. Again, not expected to live. Yet I did. And even the doctor at the time, he said, I just stitched you up. He says, you have more stitches inside than outside. He says, I just stitched and stitched and stitched, basically stop the bleeding. I mean, 21 blood transfusions, that's like 3 bodies of blood. That was a lot of blood that I was losing. And he said, God saved you. He says, I just stitched you, you know. So I was blessed, yet I actually became rather angry as a kid, and I was angry towards God because I couldn't believe that He could let that happen to me, and I couldn't believe that, other things that I saw, that God would allow it to happen. And so I developed for a long time this deep-seated resentment and anger towards God. And as a result, I also, by high school, I was getting pretty wild. I was drinking, I was smoking, I was hanging out with the party kids and getting in trouble as well. So I went from my water skiing accident to ended up being angry with God to my legs, my vascular disease in 1986. I was 27 years old and then 28 and 87. And it changed my life very, very much so. And then one day I had gone out drinking and I essentially passed out. And when I got up, my boss showed up at my door and he said, go to the hospital. And I went to the hospital, and a friend of mine at the hospital came to me and he said, are you ready? And I knew exactly what he meant. Are you ready for a new life?
Wow.
And at that point, all that anger and all that resentment that I had towards God melted away, just disappeared. I felt this swooshing feeling in my body. And as the swooshing feeling came in, I knew everything was over and everything was going to change and I was going to have a new life. And I haven't had a drink or cigarette or anything. And that was December 1988.
Yeah.
So more than 34 years ago now, my life changed.
Wow. Is that when you started seeking more of the spirituality? I think there's a shift between having like a base religion and then something happens to you and then you shift into more of a spiritual path. The first stage of the beginning of your like yoga practice, like how did yoga connect to?
Yeah, great question. And I had sort of dabbled a little bit because I'd been trying to get sober off and on for a number of years. And so I was kind of dabbling with some spiritual ideas and concepts. But after I left the hospital AMA in 87, I ended up at a place called the Pritikin Longevity Center, which it's no longer there, in Santa Monica, California. There's still one in Florida, but the Pritikin Longevity Center was really um, kind of a health rehabilitation facility, more for people that are my age now, like over 60, 70, 80 years old that are trying to restore their health. But I went there as a 28-year-old kid.
Oh,
I say kid, but I was, because it's been a long time now. And what happened there, I showed up there, and at the time, I could walk about 10 feet on my cane. Literally, that was all that I could walk. And the Pritikin Longevity Center was a plant-based diet. I mean, even back in the 80s, it was a
wow.
plant-based type diet. And the doctor there told me something different than my surgeons in Portland. The surgeons in Portland said, you need to come in and have surgery. We're going to cut your legs off. You're going to die if it hurts. You need to stop. You need to get in here. The doctor at the Pritikin Center, he says, all I want you to do is just to get up and walk. He says, just walk. He says, go out on the boardwalk. And this facility was right on the boardwalk, just south of Santa Monica Pier.
Oh,
And he said, just start walking. He says, and start walking into the pain. He says, because that's how you will get better.
whoa.
And I went, what?
Okay, I know.
And he explained it a little bit more to me. And I knew a little bit about it, that a lot of the pain was coming from claudication in my legs. So I wasn't getting enough blood flow in my legs. And he says, by going out and walking, you'll start building new blood vessels. And nobody had ever told me that. And
Yeah.
so he said, go out and just start walking up and down the boardwalk as much as you can. Take 10 steps, pause, take 12 steps, pause. I mean, literally, that's all that I could do it. But within 2 weeks, I was walking 2 miles,
Nice.
unassisted, no cane, up and down the boardwalk at Santa Monica from about the Santa Monica Pier down to Marina Del Rey and back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, how much of that experience looking back was mental? I know that there was a physical problem, but how much of that can you say was a little bit of mental?
Well, especially in hindsight, I didn't really totally, I mean, I kind of got a clue a little bit, but really it came to me more in insight that this particular doctor said, just get up and walk. Don't worry about it. Just get up and walk. Where the other doctors were telling me to worry about it. So, it was kind of like, what? Huh? You mean it's okay to get up and walk? I
Yeah,
can do that?
right.
So there's definitely a mind shift, and it's really interesting because again later on I realized I heard that same thing, that idea of don't worry about it, forget about it. And it's come back to me. And I said I started yoga there, but I went to a yoga training in 1998, and even when I went to the training I still had some pain, but instead of like a 7, 8, 9 on a scale of 10, it might be a 0 to 1, 2. There was some occasional pain.
Okay.
And I went to this teacher training in 1998, not to actually become a teacher, but to heal my body. And
Yeah.
when I went there, this yoga master, I said, well, what do I do? What modifications do I do? How do I adjust it because of this pain? He says, there is no modification. He says, don't worry about it. Forget about it. Just do the yoga. Right. And that actually ended up being, in hindsight, my biggest lesson ever in yoga was don't worry about it, forget about it. Because I wanted to worry about it. I wanted to hold on to it. And I wanted to change the yoga because I knew it wasn't right, but it was.
I love that.
Yeah.
So let's stay in the yoga for a minute before
Okay.
we deep into storytelling. You had your own studio,
Yes.
so you became a yoga teacher after your teacher training, and then how soon did you open your studio after that?
Well, when I went to the training, again, I didn't plan on becoming a teacher. I just wanted to, get rid of the final pain in my body. Right. And I had made a bunch of money in the mid 90s doing some option trading. And so I took a couple of years off and dedicated myself to this yoga. But within a week of doing the training, I was teaching in Portland, Oregon. And within a year, in 99, I had my first yoga studio. So that was 1999. And then in 2004, I opened another studio where I live here in Central Oregon, in Bend, Oregon. I opened up another studio. I ended up selling that a little bit before COVID and to one of my teachers. And then during COVID, she actually was able to sell it to somebody else when it was shut down. So now I'm teaching at that studio. So I still teach about 10 times a month or so. Yeah.
And you also like do workshops too, right? To teach other teachers.
Yeah,
Or
I've helped train about 7,000 teachers, and so I've done workshops and trainings. And one of the things I mentioned to you earlier was that I've also got this thing about chronic pain, and I like to talk about chronic pain not because I want chronic pain, but because I've been through it. And I've literally, in the 90s, I crawled out of the room because my back pain was so bad. I would literally crawl out of the yoga studio because I
oh,
couldn't move. I mean, hands and knees crawling.
oh,
And so I've been there. So like tonight where I live, I'm doing a big presentation on how to really become aware of where the pain comes from, because it's really more brain pain than in the body. All pain is in the brain anyway. But understanding that, and I brought in one of the top mind body doctors in the world, so we can have an open discussion as well about letting go of pain without opiates, without surgery, without a bunch of insurance expenses and all of that kind of stuff.
is
Just
that
by changing the mind.
yes? Is this kind of presentation is online? I'm assuming.
No, it's not. It's actually in person.
Oh, okay. Uh,
Yeah.
okay. Is it recorded? Do you usually have these type of like workshops where other people outside of Oregon can watch and attend?
Well, we are going to do more of them. This one we're not really recording and filming as such. Part of what we're going to be doing is playing a film called All the Rage, which is an award-winning film about somebody named Dr. John Sarno, which was head of clinical rehabilitation at NYU Medical Center. So we're going to play this film, and then afterwards, we're going to have a virtual discussion, the doctors coming in as well as a producer of the film, and then we're going to have the audience there at the theater that we're doing it at, and we're going to have this open discussion. This particular film, again, is called All the Rage. And for any listeners that's struggling with any chronic pain, go to alltheragedoc.com, alltheragedoc.com, and they can watch the video or the film online. It's $4 or $5. I don't know how much it's right in there. But an interesting side note, there's a doctor that practiced for a number of years up in Seattle, and he performed more back surgeries than anybody else in the country. He was and he was an expert on spinal deformities, and he stopped doing back pain or back surgery because he realized that most of it was worthless.
What?
Yeah. And so he ended up doing something that maybe sounds really odd to some people. I mean, he would do tumors, like if he had to remove a tumor, or if somebody had a car accident or some other accident where they broke the spine, that's a different thing. But general back pain, he does three things now. For somebody to be a patient, you have to agree to write twice a day for 15 minutes, expressive writing. Number two, everybody in the same household has to do the same thing. And number three, you cannot discuss pain in your house. And
Wow.
he found that through that, people actually released their back pain better than him doing surgery.
Interesting.
Yeah. A lot of that out there that's becoming more aware, more common.
Yes. Well, it's interesting, and I kind of can connect with it, and you probably know this more than I do. How, like that author, Hayes, like she talks about we
Yep.
hold emotions in our bodies, and a lot of
Yep.
we have certain pains in our body, and it's really something that we're holding to, some kind of trauma or something else.
Yeah. Well, there was a study that actually started in the 80s, and it ended up a much larger study was done through Kaiser, and it was called the ACE study. And anybody can Google it. And it's called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study.
I love.
And so they dived in and they took a look at the correlation between, originally it was for uh, really morbidly obese people, 600 pounds to 1,000 pounds, really heavy. And that's where they first started really recognizing it. But then they realized that these traumas that we had as children, especially, before 5 or 6 years old, really affected our outcomes later in life, whether we got back pain, whether we got shoulder pain, whether we got what's called fibromyalgia, which that's a whole nother story, irritable bowel syndrome, on and on and on. And they correlated and they discovered that the people that tended to get these various ailments had alcoholism in the family. Maybe one of the parents, maybe one of the parents died, maybe one of them went to jail. And there was all these different indicators that they came up with, and they could directly correlate these experiences with back pain and other chronic pain later in life and other health ailments. So it's worth taking a look at. Again, it's called the ACE study, ACE.
So I'm naming our podcast, for this story, Be Unlimited, Tell Your Story, Impact the World, right? That's what you say on your website. I want what shifted, and I know that you have pictures with great public speakers like Les Brown, which I want to know how that even I want to know how you met brilliant guy. I love him so much. What shifted that you wanted to tell your story?
Well, I didn't want to tell my story for a while. I mean, I was just like, no, I can't tell anybody these things that happen. Especially like the drinking and all of that kind of stuff and everything that happened there. It's just like, no way. You
Yeah.
know, people kept saying, "Hey, you got to tell your story. You got to tell your story. You had this water skiing accident. You went through all this drinking. You almost lost your life again through vascular disease." And they said, "You just got to tell your story." So finally, I took a big inhale and just started writing. And I like to say that I wrote my book in 10 years and 79 days. Because once I made the commitment to write it, I made a 90-day commitment. And I wrote the draft of my manuscript in 79 days before I got it edited. But and I discovered that there was a lot of power in doing this and telling my story and writing it down and going through it and finding out what was real and what wasn't real and what my emotions were, what my feelings were. It was a tremendous healing experience just to write it, you know. Then it was the releasing of the book. And I never submitted the manuscript. I was in New York in 2011 and I was at a media event because I wanted to start attracting media. I was just kind of like, I had this kind of make believe book cover thing that I did. And I showed up there and I started talking to a gentleman. I had no idea who he was. And he was a publisher. And it was a Friday. And he said, "I want to publish your book." So by
Oh,
the following Wednesday, we had a contract signed for the book. I never submitted the book to anybody,
oh,
not even to him. I just told him about
what? That's crazy. Go.
it. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel blessed on one side, but I was thinking, oh, I'm going to get, 50 rejection slips. And I was thinking that's just part of the story about being an author. And I
Mm,
never did, you know?
I love it. See, it was meant to be.
Yeah. So the book, Falling Down, Getting Up, and I'll mention this at the end too, is I've been giving it away a lot lately. And so, when we're done, and maybe you can post this too, but on my website, you can't find the book on my website, but if you use my URL, my domain, michaelbharris.com/book, if you put book in there,
Yeah.
somebody can go there and download a free copy.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
I love that name. Always loved the name Michael.
Thank you.
Very,
I
very,
always like the name Agnes.
I don't like Agnes.
I love it. It's, it's different than Sally or Michelle or Jennifer. I mean, all those names are good, but Agnes has got kind of like this ring to it. I like it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's taken me many, many years to get used to it, but um, so yeah, so telling our story, why do you think it's important? That's the first question. And the second question, when someone is brave enough to tell their story, how, what's your way to chunk it, to make it a good story when you do public speaking?
Say the first question again.
Why tell your story? Why do you think it's important for people to tell their story?
How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go on this
Hey,
one?
have time. Whatever you want to give out.
There's a lot that's going on in the world right now. We all know that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of energy bouncing around on the inside of our atmosphere from all sorts of different things. And there's a lot of people that are using story in a way to control people and manipulate people, especially, in various business and political environments, I'll say. Yet, since the beginning of man, since they were sitting around the campfire chasing dinosaurs, they were telling stories. They would go off and they would kill a dinosaur and they would come back, drag it back, and say, I can't believe what it took to kill this dinosaur, and he almost swiped me, but I dived, and I stabbed him right in the breastplate, and telling this whole story, of getting this dinosaur, or whatever animal, saber-toothed tiger. You can use really any analogy there. So the point is, though, that we've been telling stories to connect with each other for a long time. So although there are stories of control, there's also stories of connection. And especially with everything going on, I believe that the stories of connection are really important to get out, the hero's journey, so to speak. And, if I tell my story, and I'm really comfortable with it now, I don't have any problem with it anymore. If I tell my story, I'm healing myself by telling my story, by writing it down. And perhaps even somebody here that's listening today may be inspired because of what I went through, and maybe they're struggling on a physical or emotional or mental level or any level, and they seek some type of healing as a result of talking about my story. And then because they've overcome whatever health issue that could be occurring with them, then they tell their story of overcoming that might help somebody else.
Yeah.
So again, it's kind of like a domino effect. And even like my event tonight, we're going to sit around and talk about the stories that we tell ourselves about our health and our life and everything else to help rid ourselves of chronic pain. So there's again multiple different levels of it. The other question that I heard you say was about stage and all that.
Yes.
One of the things that I do is I help people actually with podcasts and being a guest on podcasts. And there's a process that I go through in helping people discover stories. So let's say somebody's 50 years old. So we divide their life into 10-year chunks. So that would be 5 10-year chunks. And then in each 10-year period, we go in and we find out maybe some of the trauma that happened, but also some of the successes, some of the really good things that happened. And through that, we pull stories out of that. Now, I could take, for instance, this podcast. So, like, I've gone through that process myself many years ago. I could take this podcast, take the transcript of this podcast, and sit down and write a keynote speech about what I talked about. So I can take the stories I'm saying here and
Right.
get up on stage, and it's said a little bit differently on stage, but the platform doesn't matter so much, because like the stories that I can tell here, I can tell there, I can tell on virtual, doesn't matter where it is. But it's learning how to use those stories. And I have multiple stories. And you mentioned the thing about Les Brown. And
Yeah.
one of the things that Les, loves to say, he says, never tell a story without a point and never tell a point without a story,
Mm.
right? So when I've known him for a number of years. Just blessed to, I don't know if you've known him at all, but there was a time, maybe a dozen years ago, and we were doing a call with a group of us, and he was actually in the hospital getting cancer treatment. And also, they were doing some studies on him because his heart. And he was on the phone, and we were saying, Les, you don't need to be here. He says, oh, yes, I do. The old Les Brown way that he does. He says, this is what keeps me alive.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, it's just like he's just like this incredible mentor, this incredible example of
Yeah.
telling stories.
Yeah. You've been really blessed to be surrounded by speakers like Les Brown. I think the other gentleman, I always forget his name, Chicken Soup, the author of, can't remember.
Jack Canfield.
Yes. Just really quick, how was that? How did you connect with them?
I actually originally met Jack way back in the 80s and early on. Um, and then his first book, The Chicken Soup for the Soul, the first book came out, and he had been struggling to get that book out. It wasn't immediately published. He had a lot of rejections with that book. But I met him along the way, and then we reconnected again. And he actually helped me with my Falling Down book. When I launched my Falling Down Getting Up book, I launched it to a platform of about 700,000 people, and Jack jumped in with part of his list as well, about 50,000 names at the time. But one of the things that Jack told me, and as he tells other people too, he says, your mess is your message.
Oh,
And
yes.
that really helped. And it was just like, oh, I mean, all this stuff that happened, this messiness is my message.
Yes.
Yes, very much so.
So don't be afraid to tell your story, you know?
Don't, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
if we are afraid, it's okay, but perhaps allow yourself to go through the fear.
a few things that I heard was one, the story of connection.
Yeah.
Someone may be inspired once you tell your story. It seems like you chunk different stages of your life to be
Yeah.
able to tell your story more of a efficient way.
Yeah.
But I missed the last one. It was something you said about the last one
What was the last one?
because I got excited about Les Brown. It was something about Les Brown.
Oh, never tell a story without a point. And never
Yes,
tell
that
a
was
story
it.
without a story.
Yes. What if someone is afraid of being in front of people? How do you even? I think that's the hardest part. It's being afraid to public speak in front of people.
And that's normal. And one of the things that I believe, and I've worked with a lot of speakers over the years, is that I believe we already have everything that we need inside of us. It's just really learning how to use it.
Hmm.
And I know for myself, when I look at speaking, I was tricked in grade school to do public speaking.
Oh yeah.
And I suspect you were too. And I suspect most of the listeners here were as well.
Oh,
And
I think I know where you're going.
show and tell.
Yeah.
Yeah. We go into school on Monday and the teacher says, tell the class what you did over the weekend. And you
Yeah.
tell this little story. It's a tricky way to get us to learn how to public speak. So, like, if I'm working with somebody now today and they're experiencing some nervousness or fear, is I remind them that they already learned how to do this. And oftentimes it's an aha moment and go, oh, yeah, well, if I could do it then, I can do it now. What am I afraid for?
True.
Yeah,
I like that. I like that. So tell me about all of your service. So you help individuals to get their story together. And what else is under your pillars of service? So,
sure. Really like to help people get their stories out. And I work with everybody from somebody that's never said a word or never written a story, doesn't know where to start, to I have a client that she's done 24 number one best-selling books and she needed help getting her story out. So it really depends, but any story, first is we start with the story. Like, what is the story? What is important for you to get out? And what is important for somebody else to hear? So it could be writing their book, helping them put it down on paper and creating a manuscript and figuring out what to do with it. Could be getting on podcasts. How do you start getting on podcasts? It's one of the best places for people to start to tell their story. And, there's lots of options today to get on podcasts. So it's a great way to start to tell your story, get clear about it and what it is. And then the third step would be stage. Where can you go talk on stage? What are keynotes that you can do? What are other events that you may be able to speak at with like-minded individuals? Do you have a situation where you overcame a health issue to maybe a health event, even starting at a local hospital? Somebody may need to hear what you have to say, all the way to conferences in Vegas. And teaching yoga is one of the places that we can get comfortable speaking in front of other people, and we're guiding them and leading them in this incredible practice that's helping them, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and all these different levels. So it's a great way to overcome our resistance or any of the fear. And, when you get into fear, there's some different levels, and without going too far, in the spine, that fearful energy that we might have, or that nervous energy, is the same energy of excitement and enthusiasm. So if we move that nervous energy to excitement and enthusiasm, then we can, shift that energy when we're public speaking to have that enthusiasm rather than the nervousness. It's just like reframing what that energy is.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to add or discuss that perhaps we didn't touch on today?
No, I think I want to mention again this idea of don't worry about it, forget about it.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I heard it from the doctor at the Pritikin Center. I heard it from my yoga teacher. And I heard it from Dr. Sarno, too, which is a mind body guy about curing chronic pain. So I heard it 3 times. The same idea of don't worry about it, forget about it. And we get so caught up. And when I really, it sounds just so simple, but at the same time, it's really powerful because I want to worry about it. I don't want to forget about it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to walk up and down the boardwalk. I don't want to do my yoga, whatever it is, right? But when I learn to let it go, it's huge. And when I go out and walk, I let it go. When I go up the buttes, as I mentioned when we first started going up the buttes, I let it go. When I do my yoga practice, when I do my meditation practice, I let it go.
Nice.
So the more I'm able to be present, the less I'm going to worry about it.
Beautiful. If someone is listening and they want to work with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Just simply go to my website, Michael B as in book, Harris.com.
Okay. And all your social media links are on your website?
Yeah. I'm rebuilding one of my links because my Facebook page, not my personal page, but my work page got hacked last year and I never got it back. So I'm having to rebuild all that.
I have one last question for you.
Yep.
Would you write a yoga book?
When is this episode coming out?
This one in 3 weeks.
Oh, in 3 weeks. Well, I will say that sometime after this episode is out, later this spring, there will be a yoga book coming out.
Yay!
That's all I'm going to say about it right now.
Okay. You'll have to come back to promote your book at Level of Trust podcast.
Yeah. I love
Awesome.
to. Thank you.
Did it for you.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a pleasure knowing you. I hope we stay connected. I will follow you on your social media accounts. And yes, once, whenever you're ready to come back, I'm always here and available to, market whatever it is that you have going on in your life.
Thank you, Agnes. I really like your show. And again, anybody that's listening, go through some of the other episodes because there's some real gems in there and really dive in and enjoy.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please visit the website at www.leveluptribes.com. And please subscribe to the podcast and share with your family and friends. Be sure to tune in to our next episode. Catch you all next time, my beloved tribes.